And then maybe once we like get going, we can come up with like a regular tagline and stuff that we do. But we'll figure that out as we
go. Absolutely.
Ready?
Yes.
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans. No, I'm not going there. She, they pronouns. You found yourself at the Trans Joy Boise podcast, and this is my co-host.
Hey everyone, I'm Pacey, and I use they, him pronouns.
And we are stoked that you're here to join us today as we talk about
the holidays.
The holidays, the joys, the sorrows, the torment, the stress. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the holidays are tough for everyone. Like, it's like, I don't know. And I feel like it's always been that way. But I think for like queer and trans folks, there's some uniqueness. And I also think there's some great opportunities as well because we are queer and trans folks.
I agree. Yeah. It's there are a lot of expectations on everybody during the holidays. And I think that there's a high level of stress with living up to those expectations, like getting gifts and the dinners and family. And I think therein lies a lot of anxiety for trans people, just with extended periods of time with your family. That could be either good or bad.
Yeah, I was talking with someone about this earlier, and they were talking about how, like, because I was thinking, like, sometimes when we go back as queer and non-binary and trans folks, going back to family, I think sometimes it feels like we're too much, or they're like, you need to like, can you just bring it down a little bit, whatever, like there's sort of that sort of vibe. But I heard them say the fact that like, that I was aware too much. And I liked that language because I think that was a lot of the challenge going back home beyond just being queer and trans, which is, I think, part of it for me. I think because I'm queer and trans, I have had the opportunity to become more aware of things that I wasn't prior to. And so I think that's the other aspect when you're like sitting around the table at dinner and they're saying shit and you're just like, oh, we don't talk like that. Like, that is not how you think, Dad. You do not know. No, you did not just,
we don't say that anymore.
Well, and we never should have said it.
Right.
Yeah, but it's also like, yeah, it's, so I had never heard that before, like being aware too much. And I was like, I don't think, in that setting, it feels like it's too much. Yeah.
It's interesting to go from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
Like with my family, they're all allies. They're wonderful. But, my parents are a little bit older. So a lot of the things that like my dad will say, just joking, I'm like, you can say that here, but don't say that when we go out to dinner. Like that kind of vibe.
People are not going to hear it the way that you're trying to say it.
Yeah. And with our community, it's very PC. Like we go out of our way to make sure that we don't use words that are like maybe now considered slurs or derogatory that maybe weren't 20 years ago. Right. And then going back to that, it's just kind of jarring.
It's very jarring. And I think it's an interesting balance because, I think context and understanding where it's coming from, I think that's part of the challenge though. Cause it's like, I know I grew up hearing things that I should not have ever heard before. Right. Oh, yeah. And the intent was never the worst intent ever. But the fact is that they, and I myself, didn't understand the weight that came with some of those words and some of that language. And so it really took me an opportunity to go out and understand how those words impacted the people that those words were describing, to really understand the weight of the slang terms or derogatory terms or things that were some ways, I know that my parents and people around me were never overtly trying to be racist or trying to be homophobic or trying to be harmful. And yet it was very much so. And the fact that we didn't know the gravity of those words is wherein lies the issue, right?
It just changes. Like we evolved, right? I think back to like playing video games in 2005, and listening to, you hear things. Well, it's actually probably kind of still similar now, but it means something else now.
Yeah.
And for me, I think a lot of that came from life experience. Not only being a teenager and a young adult back when a lot of those things were considered the norm, and now looking back on it, it's just like, wow, things are just so different.
Yeah.
But we've grown and we've learned so much, and it's difficult. And it's like with my family, my parents particularly, uh, for a long time, and still they kind of struggle with pronouns and like my chosen name.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to remember, like, they're retired. They aren't familiar with any of this kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
don't, it's not in the media that they consume. They're not surrounded by it. Like, they don't go out into the community and interact with people
Mm-hmm.
like me. It's just me.
Right.
So it's interesting to go from one extreme of like being totally immersed in it here and then
Mm-hmm.
going home and just be like, oh,
It's a
there's
little
quite a
jarring.
learning curve
Yeah,
here.
yeah. It's definitely a little jarring. Yeah. And I think and my parents are great people. They've always been great allies and really like want to support me and
Mhm.
stuff. But I think it's definitely like it's changed over the years on what that might look like and sound like. And one of the things that I've had to come to learn, and I don't know, I think it's like a navigating space with family. Period around our queerness and transness. I think especially around the holidays. I think it's really important to be able to say, I'm not down for that, like, and just to stay away from your family if that's something that you need to do. Just stay away from your blood family or family of origin, if you will, and make space with other chosen family or friends. Because I think sometimes we feel like we have to force ourselves, and this is where I think sometimes being queer and trans is a blessing, is because we get to wrestle this and say like, oh, I don't want to be with my family because of the stresses and anxieties because I'm queer and trans. And the reality of it is so many of those other people at the table don't want to be there either for a lot of the same reasons. But I think sometimes because we're queer and trans and all that, we kind of like, oh, we can use that as a way for us to kind of like, oh, wait, no, this, we don't fit because of this. And the reality of it is sometimes the way these functions are set up and the dysfunctionality or the stresses and anxieties of the world and the families are already problematic or difficult with or without our transness being a part of it.
Yeah. And you're totally right. Like your family, if your family doesn't get along, it's because like you guys are very different and you don't get along, like with sibling rivalry and things like that.
Yeah.
But then you add on the differences of being non-binary, being trans, and then now even the added pressures of having to deal with people on opposite side of like the political aisle, where one side can be really dangerous almost. And that's, I can only imagine, like I'm really privileged because my family is wonderful. Yeah. They are so supportive in every way that one could be supportive. But like my partner, their family is like the fucking opposite end of that. And I can't even imagine the anxiety and the stress and the anger that they must feel when they have to go. Cause like it's Thanksgiving, you have to go see your fucking family, right? And being exposed to people that are downright hateful in their rhetoric is just, it's not something you should have to deal with when you're with family.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I think one of, and this is going to sound weird, and this is probably because some time has passed, but one of the things I think I've been really grateful for, and it's made it a little bit more, I think, easier navigating, is the fact that my family was like, don't come around anymore for a while, which was rough to hear. But I think in doing that, there was like, it's been some time for me to really get to, one, develop my own chosen family and my own networks and friendships and traditions and practices that I like to enjoy. So I think it's in some ways given me permission to do my own thing. I'm like a grown ass person. I don't need to be like doing what my family does because that's what we've always done. You know what I mean? So, and I think what it's allowed for me to do is actually come to have some gratitude for even just the slightest connection, which a while back I would have had just no tolerance for misgendering, not even trying, like all these sorts of things. And recently, my mom's been dealing with cancer, and they've been challenged with my transition the last 4 years, 3 years and some change or whatever. And so we've had to spend a lot of time apart from one another. And recently, my I was actually in a car with my parents. I don't think I talked about this on the podcast today. And like this was like just a week or so ago, where I was in a car with my parents, and my dad hasn't spoken to me in years or even acknowledged me, and I didn't. And I was there with my mom, who's in like, she's been fighting cancer for 2 years now. She's like lost her hair. She's in a really bad way, right? And I hadn't seen her in a month, and so I was just really excited to see her, and I was kind of happy that my dad was not like, he wasn't like, "Hey, what's up?" But he was at least acknowledging that I was in the room or in the car. And I was just so happy, and I was so grateful for that, even though they continued to refer to me as their son and Uncle so and so, and he this and all that, and like I didn't care, which is so crazy because before I took this time away from my family, I would not have been able to do that. I would have been so pissed off about the fact that this, that, or the other, that I wouldn't have been able to even be grateful that like I'm sitting across from my mom. Like I get to give her a hug, like those were things I got to hang on to, even though it didn't show up in the form that I wanted. And, and there are times in our life when it's important to like stand your ground and say, this is how I need to be seen and this is how I needed to be heard. Because there were times in my life when that had to happen. But I'm so grateful that I can be in a point in my life where I can maybe soften a little bit and not be so rigid in order to spend some time with my family. And I don't feel like I'm a sellout. I think before I would have thought I was selling myself out. I wasn't standing up for myself, or I was being a pushover. And it's like, no, I'm actually just really grateful to have this moment, even if it's not ideal. Like I'm wearing a shirt where like you can see that I have breasts. And they're still calling me, their son. And I'm just like,
it's
it doesn't make sense. But
and you
whatever.
Just kind of gotta laugh at some point, every once in a while, and I think that that's really beautiful. And the distance has given you a new perspective, I think, on what really genuinely matters. But it's also given you your autonomy back when it comes to dealing with your family, because so many times, like before, you didn't have a choice. Like they didn't want to talk to you, right? And now it's the power is more on you.
Well, I think a big part of my dysfunction with my family was not the fact that I didn't want to spend time with them and I didn't want to be with them. It was this fact that sometimes I felt like the obligation or the responsibility, the only way to be a good child or to do things right, was I had to do this and do that and do the other. And both of those things are true to some extent. Like, I guess sometimes I would get so caught up in like, I have to do this and then I'd begrudgingly do it and be upset about it, when underneath I also wanted to, you know what I mean? And so now I've just gotten to a point where I can put that first. No, I want to spend time with my family. I miss them. I want to know what's going on in their life. I want them to know what's going on in my life. And that's what I'm going to try to lead with, rather than like, oh, it's the holidays, I have to be with my parents, or, oh, it's the holidays, I should be with them and I'm not, and get all sad and mad and all those sorts of things, which are okay. But I like that I'm kind of getting to a better place. But even just a few months ago or last year, it was not cute.
I think it was not really cute. Cool. Yeah, no, I get it. I love that change in perspective of I don't have to do these things. I get to.
Yeah.
And it reminds me,
and like authentically, because I think there's been plenty of my times in my life, especially in early recovery, they're like, no, you get to go to work and you get to, and it's like trying to change that. But like, I genuinely am happy about what I get to do.
Yeah. And it's hard to get there because, and just as in recovery, it's like fake it till you make it, right? Like you fake that attitude of like, yay, I get to do this.
Right. And then you don't have to fake it anymore because you actually are enjoying it and you've got it. Yeah. Yeah. I had given up on it. I don't know how I did it, but I actually gave up. I actually got okay with the fact that I may never speak to my father again.
Yeah.
Which was not anywhere I thought I could ever get.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I still might have said it asshole under my breath and things like that. But it was also just a part of me that was like, just like, I was sad about it, but there was just like an acceptance. And just because you accept things doesn't mean you think it's okay. But I'd really just got to a point where I was like, maybe it will never happen, and I got to live my life anyway. And I can't let that it's not happening it take away from the rest of my life. Because for a long time, I really was letting it, what do they say? Like steal the chocolate chips from my cookies. That's not the analogy, but like it was stealing my joy in every aspect. Instead of just being sad about this one thing, it kind of, took over a lot more space in my life than I would have liked.
That makes sense.
But it was part of the process.
Yeah, of course. It reminds me of this thing that I'm sure a lot of people have seen online that's been circulating. That's like when you're really frustrated or dealing with things in life that are upsetting or difficult, to imagine that you're like 90 years old and you are given this opportunity to go back to the age that you are right now. And you get this beautiful second chance to relive these things and to try and keep that perspective. And I can do that, and it's wonderful. I can truly embody that. Like, I get to do these things, even horrible things. Like, I get to go to the DMV, but
right.
But it's so fleeting because I can get into that mindset and like genuinely embody that authentically. But then something will happen, and it's especially lately. Like, I'll turn on the news, and I'm just like, well, fucking goddamn it, and then it's gone. But I really strive to be able to maintain that mindset. It's just such a challenge, but it's particularly during the holidays and being around my family, because I try to be as mindful as I can and really take in the experience and remember everything that I can.
Yeah, and we both have been kind of dealing with our transness and queerness with our family for a while now, and so we've kind of gotten to a place where I think we can cope better or plan better or whatever. But what would you say? What would your advice? Not that we give advice, but your thoughts or suggestions that you would give to somebody who might be a little bit newer in this experience, where maybe they just recently came out or just recently had a challenge with their family, and how would you suggest them manage the holidays given that sort of relationship with friends or family or whatever?
I think that depending on the relationship you have with your family, if it's difficult or strange surrounding, your transition or anything like that, really rely on your friends right now. They're your chosen family, and they're going to be your biggest source of support through this. And with your family, if your family is trying, just remember that they're trying. This is new for them too, and they are grieving something in their own way, which, aside from whether or not they should be, that's a completely different discussion, right? But they're grappling with this probably the best way they know how, and try and be supportive and patient in that.
Well, and I think a big thing is I think guard your heart, but lean into the discomfort. So I think it's totally okay. Like, if your heart can't take it, because sometimes we can get wounded so much, or we can push ourselves through things that it hurts so much that it causes us to partake in behaviors and activities that maybe aren't so good for us. So it's like, yes, I went and endured time with my family, but now I'm going to go use drugs or substances or fuck a whole bunch of people or what. I'm speaking from my own experience. like those sorts of things that we do kind of to counteract that. And I think sometimes I wish I would have learned sooner that I could just say no if I wasn't feeling okay about it. And but also to challenge myself. Am I just uncomfortable, or am I really not in a good place for this? And so I think those are things I would encourage people to, if it's uncomfortable, lean into it. If it's painful, you might not want to go there just yet, and do something to tend to that pain or not go into that pain ahead of time. And I think that's really important, just I think for any people, but I think especially people who might be in recovery from substances or eating or mental health challenges or whatever sorts of things. I think it's very human nature for us to reach for something outside of ourselves to make us feel good. And I think that's just natural and normal. And some of us, it gets a little cattywampus.
Absolutely. It does.
And so anything we can do to kind of counteract that can be really helpful. And sometimes it is just saying no. Sometimes it is not going near the thing or around the thing. And other times you maybe do something that feels good before and after the time with the family.
Yeah.
Or you can bring somebody with you when you go spend time with the family.
It's a little bit of a buffer.
Exactly. Also, one thing you could do is not stay with your family. I know sometimes I always had times when I went back to my parents and I had to like live with them for a week, you know?
Mhm.
And I think if there were times when I could have stayed somewhere else or, you know, whatever, that could have helped us all maybe have a little bit better experience with it. So I think, you know, it takes a little bit of foresight, but I think there are some things that we can do to try to alleviate some of the challenges.
That's really great advice. And I just come at it from, it's just different from my family because my family and I, like my parents are my best friends.
Has it always been that way?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
have you always let them?
Yeah.
Either too.
Well, when I was a teenager, I was going through some shit. And I'm
As
sure
a teenager,
I was really difficult. And like in my early, well, all through my 20s, really, because I was really mentally ill and I was an addict and I was active in my use until I was 23. And that's when I got clean. And, you know, that really is difficult for the family to deal with. But, you know, since then, we've just been really, really tight. So I love going home. So you're getting very different answers if you're listening to this podcast, but I think that's really cool because
there's not one narrative for what it means to be queer and trans with our families, you know. And the reality of it is some people might relate to me, some people might relate to you, but most likely it's going to be somewhere maybe in between or on opposite sides even. So
I think that it's, I don't know, with addiction and the holidays and trans, all of these things, you just really need to be mindful of your boundaries and where you're at emotionally. Yeah. Because once you hit your limit, like you said, like maybe take some space because the holidays are difficult for everybody. And if you look at statistics, you know, nothing great happens mentally. I mean, there's a lot of issues during like Christmas. Suicide rates go up, you know, substance use goes way up.
Like one of the busiest nights of the bar is like Thanksgiving night.
Oh my God.
Like the night before Thanksgiving.
Drunk driving records are like the highest on Thanksgiving nights. It's wild.
Yeah.
So just be mindful of those things because, and even if our demographic, our community is more likely to have mental health issues or substance use disorder as it is. So when you are in a space or a time of year that is heightened stress, like that's just a horrible combination. So be aware of that.
And part of it too is I know like we're like folks who are in recovery, and so we don't want to necessarily be around that. But I think some of it is just around harm reduction. You know, are there things that I can do to alleviate some of this discomfort or some of the harm that might be caused, whether significant or not, as I go through some of these sorts of things. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be like complete abstinence or not using substances, even to cope or to help with things, but just being able to think about moderation and dosing and when and who and how, all those sorts of things they're just like little bits of thought, I think, that could be put into that to kind of begin to kind of like lessen the harm or potential harm of things.
Yeah. And I will take this opportunity, I will take any opportunity really to encourage people to get Narcan and carry it and to also get fentanyl testing strips to just keep on you because like, as a former user, like New Year's Eve, come on. There are huge parties for that. And just be prepared because, you know, if something happens, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And it's super easy to get. We can link some resources in the show notes for this on where you can get both Narcan and fentanyl testing strips. So that'll be good.
Really great point.
And for recovery, we've both been in recovery for 16 years.
I know exactly that. Yeah. We're littermates.
Yeah.
As some would say.
Even though,
yes. So and we started at the same time, but we've taken very different routes and strategies on how we've done that. And maybe even why we did that. But maybe that's for another podcast, but I don't know.
Well, one thing I'd just like to touch on a little bit is if you are in recovery, what you can do to help stay sober or safe during the holidays. And I know a lot of my recovery I did in 12-step groups, and those are wildly problematic. And I totally get it. It's so much so that there's like the trope of if you go to AA or NA long enough, you'll end up with a religious tattoo. And I did that. It was terrible. Like I need to get that covered. But because I feel like it can be really exploitative of vulnerable people to sell the narrative of religion. And I think that's really harmful. But I like to, when I work with people on it, I offer them options without any higher power because I'm not a religious person.
Right.
And I think that that's just as important. But they do offer some cool things where they have like 24-hour meetings, like marathons. And I used to sign up for those. So it would be like Thanksgiving night at 3 a.m. and I would be at a sober house, like leading meetings so that you always had somewhere to be. And I think if we could find some options like that aren't 12-step, that would be fantastic because, I mean, that's a whole other meeting in and of itself, like the people that leave and relapse or die because they're not religious. But I think it's a cool idea to have a place where you can go and be safe and have fun and just not be alone on the holidays. If you don't have family or a great support system of friends, like what are you going to do? What are your options?
Yeah. And regardless of your recovery, these are strategies you could think about, like getting through the holidays. You know, I think sometimes we might choose to not do the holidays with family, either because we're far away or we don't give any fucks anymore, like whatever. I think it's important that we think about, though, what are we going to do on that day? Because I know I found myself thinking like, oh, I'm fine. I can do Thanksgiving by myself. I don't even like to call it that anymore, but I can do this holiday by myself. And then I'm all by myself and I'm like, I'm all by myself, you know? And then it's like, what do I do at that point? But, you know, thankfully, you know, I have been parts of like different recovery groups where on holidays is a great day to usually connect with other folks because we're not the only ones that are struggling with dealing with the holidays. So if we can reach out to other people that we know aren't with their family or friends on these days, sometimes that can be helpful to even get us out of ourselves, is to just show up for other people. Like, I think that's why a lot of queer folks have Friendsgivings and they have opportunities for friends to get together and do certain things. And even probably why bar nights and stuff are so popular is because it's a space where we can all go and kind of escape our loneliness and our rejection or whatever sort of feelings those are. So I think it's helpful to have a plan for that. And even like, you can still, like, I've spent plenty of holidays not doing holiday things and been totally okay, you know? And I think sometimes for me too, sometimes it's just like, I remember, I think it was a recent holiday. One of the things that I love about my family around the holidays is we always have like meats and cheeses and dips.
Oh yeah,
and,
of course,
all that stuff. And so one holiday I was going to be by myself. So I just got my own chips and dips and meats and cheeses, and I ate them all by myself, sitting here in my living room. And it was perfectly okay. And it was just a little bit of that nostalgia and a little bit of the connection with the good things and the things that I missed about the holidays to kind of help me feel a little bit more connected and maybe even a little bit more like I had some agency in how I was going to be impacted by not being with friends and family over the holiday.
That would be, I think having a plan is a really good idea because I'm the same way. I'll be like, oh, I'll be fine, right? It's Thanksgiving or whatever. Yeah. And I'll be fine until it's like nighttime and it's really quiet in the house and I'm all alone and I'm just stuck with my thoughts. And that is never a great place for me to be stuck, you know? You know, my mind starts running with anxiety, but then also like nostalgia and maybe sadness or regret. And then it's not that it's a dangerous place for me to be anymore. It certainly used to be before I did my ketamine therapy. That was a dangerous place for me to be. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So being around other people at that time was not only, you know, more comfortable, but it was safe.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, and that makes me think of too is like you might even be able to get through that whole holiday and not have any feelings or whatever. But I think one of the things that we don't always think about is an emotional hangover. So
Yeah.
whether we decide to stay by ourselves and we're dealing with those emotions or not dealing with those emotions, or maybe we do go and do the family visits or we do the things. There's a lot of emotional labor. There's a lot of emotions that happen. And I think oftentimes we're not aware of it. And I think sometimes we'll go back to our homes or we'll go back to our normal life or whatever. And then like the next day, we're just like fucking angry and sad and mad and like just like coming down in this like really bad way. And we're just like, I don't understand why. It's like, well, bitch, you just were in a whole whirlwind of emotions for days or hours or whatever, and you need to take care of yourself with that. And sometimes just being aware that, oh, I did this thing, so I'm going to feel a little funky for a day or two. Then maybe I schedule some time to hang out with friends, or I tell my roommate, hey, could you be around too? Or I, make plans to have dinner with friends. Or if I'm part of a group, a recovery group or a trans group or any sort of group, that I make sure that I attend that thing, so that I can just kind of get reconnected and kind of back into that reality and kind of cope and work through some of those emotions, I think.
That's a really good idea. That's great advice. And I need to do that too, because I know whenever I go home for the holidays or for anything, I get so burnt out just because I'm an introvert, and just being around people constantly just really drains me.
Yeah.
And I have to have like an entire day where I can just sit in silence and just kind of regroup and even go. One of my favorite things to do in those instances is to just put my headphones on and go hiking in the foothills.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things. But a lot of the time I just don't have time. And then that just builds on it and builds on it. And then a couple weeks later, I'll just freak out. And I'll be like, oh, that's so weird. I randomly freaked out. It's like, no, it was not random. Like this has been brewing for a long time.
Yeah.
And just taking, knowing that that'll happen is.
Yeah, you need something to kind of like bring you back to your normative, like to ground you again. Because I think the other thing I know for me for a long time with my family, I can click into this like default mode that like when I'm around my family, this is the person that I am. This is what I do. This is what I don't do. And that can be very jarring. I think for a long time it would happen and I wouldn't even notice it. Like I would go home, I would do my thing, and I would just become who I always was. And then I would go back to my normal life and I'd be like, wait, this doesn't, you know what I mean? It's this weird sort of feeling. So I know I had like this default mode when I'm with different people, and that default mode is not my everyday life that gives me life and helps me feel good and sustenance and nurturing. And so I have to do something to kind of get reconnected back into that, or I can kind of get stuck in that default state.
That's really an interesting point. And you're absolutely right. It's like a role that we're playing. And
you just click right into it, and you don't even have to like think about it. It's like next thing I know, I'm sitting on the couch for 2 days watching TV.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Because that's what we do back home. We all get together and we watch TV and we talk and we do all that, and it's well and good, but that's just not how I'm able to function in the long term in my life, to kind of get back into like a life that feels good to me. I can get stuck in that really easy, and it's just, it just doesn't make me feel good after a few days.
And it's even, you're not genuinely you, I think, in some of those roles
or who I am now.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like reverting back to who we were. Like my parents have lived in the same house my entire life, and well before my life started. And so my bedroom has been my bedroom forever. And, through all those stages in my life, and so many times like I'd have to move back home and live with my parents because I was too like mentally ill to maintain employment or whatever. And when I'm back in my bed, sleeping in that room, it's like I can look at all of those different versions of myself, and it's really uncomfortable at times to kind of confront that and those memories there. But it's also easy to kind of regress into some of those roles of
and
just
being
like
that person again.
And even just like with my transition or whatever, I'm more okay with just being like, no, it's okay, you can call me that old name or whatever.
Right.
And because it's comfortable and it's normal and it's also easy.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier.
So maybe it's a gift that my dad, as soon as I moved out, he moved all his NASCAR paraphernalia in there.
Oh my God, that's such a
My
cliche.
room looks nothing like what it did when I lived in it.
Yeah,
Maybe that's a little gift.
It's wild because I go in there and I think of, you know, sleeping in there when I'm in elementary school, or like being there when I was, you know, actively using,
Mhm.
and it's just it's strange. It's like an existential crisis kind of thing every
Mhm.
time.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to look at my notes real quick because I think, you know, with the holidays and stuff, there's lots of things that kind of come up.
Mhm.
Nostalgia food, be intentional, guard your heart. Queerness is, oh, I think that's one thing I wanted to bring up too, is like, I think one of the gifts, because I fucking love being queer and I love being trans. But I think one of the things that it's afforded me, and I kind of talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but like we get to do what we want. Like a big part of my queerness is that I'm not like everybody else, and that's on purpose. You know, and that's something that I continue to push myself to be outside of the status quo in some extent. And that can be like whatever, and you can have an opinion, but that's how I live my life. Right.
Yeah.
And yet there's some times where I feel like I have to do things the way everyone else does them, you know, like even just like, you know, sometimes we have like queer people who have like heteronormative relationships, but they're queer. It's like, no, I'm queer because I'm going to do things queerly. I'm going to do things differently,
Right.
you know? And so I think sometimes we could think about that too, is like, we get to make our own traditions. We get to make our own practices and our own things that we can do every year. We don't necessarily have to stay in the roles on the paths that our family went into if that doesn't feel good or suit us any longer. You know, that we can say, okay, I'm going to go spend Christmas Eve with my parents, but on Christmas Day, we're gonna get all my friends together. We're gonna watch Ben de la Creme's Christmas, and then we're gonna watch Rent, and then we're gonna I don't know, play Uno, and then we're gonna go out to the bar and do karaoke. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? And that's what we do every Christmas. I get to decide that,
Right.
but I don't think we always think we can. But like, we're grown.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, you've always been the child in the family, right? And for me, it's like that with my older sister. Was I ever a child though?
Anyway,
like my sister is 14 years older than me, and I'm a lot bigger than her now, but I still am fucking terrified of her, you know. And like,
I thought you were like an only child for some reason.
Well,
you're kind of raised as an only child.
Like if there's 7 years or more in the age gap, then like psychologically I am both an only child and the youngest, and my sister is the only and the oldest.
Oh wow.
So like going home, I revert back to this little kid where my sister could beat my ass, you know, and I don't test it because I'm
not
like,
anymore.
Yeah, but like I revert
not
back
that we're
to
beating anybody's ass,
right? No, and she never did that, but man, she got me.
Yeah. See, my brother and I were 2 years apart, so we were, and I was the oldest, but
always fighting.
We were like, when we were kids, we were always very opposite. Like, I was great at school. He was not as great at school. I was always in trouble at home. He was never in trouble at home. He wore black all the time. I did not wear black all the time. I very rarely wear black even now.
Yeah.
But now as adults, we're like really, we're really close.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty wild. I think when we were young, it was just like, and we were so close in age, there was this kind of this competition. And plus, like, we both were like, I raised as boys, but I wasn't a boy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that I was doing was very more feminine. So, you know, I liked hanging out with mom and grandma, and I liked making earrings and crafts, and I didn't like being out in the trucks and the cars and fixing shit, and, you know, and so we just were very opposite in a lot of ways. But I think also some of it had to do with a little bit of like, I was a trans person but I wasn't aware of it at the time.
That makes sense. Yeah, my sister and I were the exact same, but just opposite, right? But my family kind of raised me as a little boy. Like all my life, they just never.
They met you where you were at.
Yeah, like they were just like, okay, like that's fine. You can take karate instead of dance. You can, you know, I remember.
Do you think much of that was raising you as a boy, or raising you with the idea that women don't have to be a certain way?
That, because like my dad was a pioneer
that felt weird
for change in all of his career for like equality and things like that. But yeah, they just kind of accepted me for what I was. And like there was just quickly this thing that happened in elementary school. I got invited to a birthday party, and it was this girl, this real popular girl, and she had a costume party because her birthday was right around Halloween. So I get there, it's like fifth grade, I think, and all of the girls are dressed up as like Disney princesses, and I was dressed up as Ghostface, and I was like, this feels so awkward. So like other people would be like, oh, who's he? Who's the little boy that you invited? And they're like laughing, and I'm like, okay. And that was my whole childhood. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to go home because they've always accepted me as that, but now as an adult, it's evolved. But I still feel drawn back to who I was when I'm.
It's so wild. Our inner child and our child is just like, she's always there with me. I feel like she's louder now than she ever was.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like we're probably right at that time frame again to call it a show. I hope that this was helpful for folks throughout the holidays and the holiday season. We'd love, again, as always, we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to share with us what's been helpful or useful to you. Also, if you're looking to connect or whatever through the holidays, feel free to reach out to us on our socials. We'll be doing our things, but we'll also be keeping an eye out for folks. So if you're looking to connect, try for us. And if we don't respond, reach out to somebody else too, because I'm sure there'll be somebody there that will want to connect with you.
Absolutely. I'll try and make sure that I'm at least a little available, or at least aware that I have a phone during the holidays. So that way, if anyone is in crisis or something, reach out. But like Bonnie Violet said, if we're not there, definitely reach out to someone else. Just don't try and get through it by yourself.
Agreed. Me too. Christmas Eve, I'm excited to go home, be with my parents. But outside of that, I should be pretty available for folks.
Yeah.
And probably even then, I'll be hiding on my phone a little bit to soften the anxiety of it all. But all right.
Perfect. All right. And if you have any questions or anything that you would like us to talk about in future episodes, go ahead and just leave that in the comments.
Yes. And you can listen to us on Spotify at this point. We are working on other podcasts as well. So if you don't want to watch us, you can listen to us. And if you're listening to us, you can watch us on YouTube. Not to get too wonky. All right. Bye-bye.
See you next week.
Ridiculous.
That was a really good one. Both of the ones we did today were